paranormal pals, and welcome to the Secret Society of the Spooky Sisterhood podcast. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Melanie. If you've stumbled into our headquarters here, our Not So Secret Society is a community that's built through social media to connect like-minded paranormal enthusiasts, and our goal is to lift up those in this space, especially but not exclusively women, who traditionally haven't had that opportunity. We hold events, both live and virtually, offer a bi-weekly blog, run a Patreon with additional spooky perks, and lots more to come like this podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by a member of our sisterhood, a special guest, or both, as we discuss one of the many fascinating topics in the paranormal, or what I like to call the spooky adjacent space. Our hope is that our podcast will have a little something for everyone. So without further ado, let's call this meeting to order. For everyone who's returned, welcome back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. We're so glad you're here. I'd also like to welcome Spooky Sisterhood Council Member Androniki to tonight's meeting.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
You may have noticed a little change in the environment here this week, and that is in response to some feedback we got on the first few episodes. Hopefully this is a better vibe for those of you who are watching the videos. And I did want to take a moment to note, please do send your feedback. We listen to all of it, and we want to be the best that we can be for all of you, so comment away. That being said, I am dying to introduce you to this week's guest. This person is many things: an author, a scholar, and a high priestess. She's working on her PhD in chasing the paranormal. I, and many of you, I'd wager, first came to know this person through their educational TikToks about Wicca and witchcraft. And if you haven't figured it out by now, this person is the one and only Thorn Mooney.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Hi, Thorn. So I told everybody a little bit about you, but what else should we know? Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up? Was the paranormal part of your early years?
That's so funny. Yes-ish, right? I'm a product. I was born in the 80s, right? But a child of the 90s. And so I grew up with the X-Files. That was a big influence on my relationship, not just with like paranormal things, but I think with the world. I was also living in the Washington, D.C. area at the time. So that imagine watching that show and also seeing essentially your neighborhoods right in the background. My parents were both military, so we moved around a little bit, but mostly we were in Northern Virginia. I went to school in the district. So the X-Files was very formative. And I think for a lot of people, I know Mulder was really the ticket, but I was a Dana Scully girly.
Scully
I
all day.
right. I was really impressed that she participated in these spaces as a skeptic. She had a medical degree. She was a special agent. I just thought that she was so cool. And when I was younger, my mother would tell me, you could be an FBI agent. This is false. There was no way that was ever going to happen for many reasons. And now I'm too old. So I became an academic instead. But Scully is in the back of my brain a lot of the time. So I guess the other thing to know is that I know that people use the word skeptic in paranormal spaces in particular ways, and often they're using that word differently than they are necessarily in other realms. I would argue that if you're engaging with these things at all, you're probably not a skeptic in the conventional sense.
Yeah.
True skeptics tend to not actually hang out in the spaces that they're skeptical about. But I would say that I came here primarily as an ethnographer, as a researcher. I had never been in paranormal spaces before that. My interest in the X-Files and ghost stories and all of those things that I think are very typical of children really didn't point me to things like paranormal investigation. If anything, they pointed me to witchcraft. I ended up in witchcraft pretty early. But the overlap there is, I think, maybe not as prevalent sometimes as people often assume. So sorry, I just said a lot of words at you, but yes, that's a lot. Hello.
You did great, and you answered the question very well. And we actually are going to talk a little bit later about that overlap, like you were saying, between the paranormal and witchcraft as well.
So how then did you get into the paranormal?
Um, I went into my PhD program wanting to study secularism and wanting to think about the blurry spaces around what it means for people to be religious or spiritual, all of the different words that we take for granted that have very real legal, political consequences out in the world, right? You might not personally like using the word religious to describe you, but if you do, it tells the IRS something about how they should do your taxes, right? So these words are really tied up in a lot of things beyond just whatever our personal proclivities are. And I was coming off of this moment, especially in witchcraft spaces, where the idea of secular witchcraft was really trending on Tumblr. I don't know if you remember this moment. And the fact that there have been different kinds of witches for so long has been a reality, okay, for much longer. But the phrase secular witch and the idea that witchcraft is a secular practice really became a thing on the internet after like the 2010s. This was not how we spoke in the 1990s. Um, and there are lots of reasons for that shift, but I was really intrigued about that, especially coming from an openly religious form of witchcraft, right? I've been Wiccan the whole time. And I was really kind of trying to dive into what that meant to these people I was meeting on the internet who were describing themselves as secular witches and getting my head around that. And it led me into this rabbit hole as a religious studies scholar because it turns out that witches actually aren't special for using that language. The language of the secular and secularism was something that I was encountering even amongst the evangelical Protestants that I was
Yeah.
studying for my MA degree. Evangelicals will also tell you that they're not doing religion, right? They're not using the word secular necessarily, but they're insisting that, oh, it's not like religion, right? Religion's about dogma. Religion's about being told what to do. And seeing that take shape um, in all of these different ways. So originally, this is my long roundabout way of getting there.
Fascinating. Don't stop.
Originally, I was going to be doing a series of case studies as a scholar, thinking about groups that from the outside seem to be doing something related to religion or the spiritual, etc., and yet are using the language of the secular. So I was thinking about those secular witches I mentioned. I was thinking about office productivity culture, right? This idea of my boss just gave us headspace because apparently meditation is going to make us more productive at work, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about wellness culture, this idea that it's medical, right? It's not religious. And then I was also thinking about the paranormal because from the outside, it looks like here's a bunch of people who have feelings about afterlives, chasing spirits, talking to spirits, many of whom identify as witches, and yet they're calling it science. I have to look at this up close. So originally, I was imagining a dissertation where I had a chapter on each of those groups, and I figured out real fast A, I don't want to talk about other witches because that's like too close to where I live. And B, I don't want to spend that much time in a corporate office. So maybe I should just focus on the paranormal folks. So I dove in. I went through the process to get clearance through my university's IRB so I could interview people and go to events. And I've just been all in for the last year. So that's where I am.
That's amazing. I feel like you're absolutely right about all of that, of course, but especially about, you know, the paranormal itself could be, I mean, a decade long study in terms of everything that you're talking about here. And I'm so thrilled to read what you come up with after all of this because I think it's fascinating myself. And I think that honestly, that kind of is part of what drew me to it. As someone who's religious, I felt as though it wasn't something that was like forbidden to me, but that maybe would give me a different understanding of my own religious practices or my own religious beliefs. And I think there's a lot of overlap there. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And I did want to ask you, so how did that kind of lead to talking about this on the internet?
I don't seem to be able to stop talking about it is really the problem. This goes back to, I think, child of the 90s, right?
Yeah.
I
Control yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I came of age on AOL homepages and GeoCities, and
Oh
then ended up
God.
with LiveJournal, right? You remember all of this? Angels
All of it.
Literature?
Live
Right? Like
journal.
we taught ourselves HTML so we could put like cool backgrounds in our live journals and build our little websites.
I just wanted
And
the little sparkles on everything,
oh,
honestly.
Yep.
totally. Those Robin
Music.
Hood spinning pentacle gifts, right?
Yeah,
Like, 1,000%.
all of it.
And then social media came around, and suddenly it was a lot easier. You didn't actually have to know anything about websites. You could just set up a profile. So there's stuff from baby Thorn Mooney on the internet going back to probably 1998 or 1999. It's really embarrassing, right? And it's just who I am at this point. I started blogging and blogging. I knew I wanted to write books at some point, but that really happened because I was a blogger. And as a scholar, and I don't think this is a hot take anymore, given how things kind of are going in recent years. I think that that wall that keeps, we joke about the ivory tower, right? It's not a joke, but those paywalls and those boundaries and those, those restrictions we have on access to research, are driving more and more scholars with formal training, not even just out of classrooms, but also onto the internet.
Yeah.
Instead of writing academic articles, people are starting blogs, right? Instead of publishing with an academic press that's going to print 12 copies that are going to cost $200,
And pay
Right.
you nothing.
yeah, why not go with HarperCollins or whatever? So I have found that my presence on like Blue Sky, for example, has been way more fruitful in terms of professional academic networking than, for example, spending literally thousands of dollars as an unfunded graduate student, right? Travel
Yeah.
unfunded to go to like a conference. So I started talking about my interests, and people were into it, and I made friends and found other scholars who were writing about this stuff. And scholars are just big, usually neurodivergent nerds who want to info dump at each other. So, like, that's what we do. And it's great.
These
It's
are
great.
my people.
Yeah.
So why do you think so many people who are more devout in their faith tend to dismiss or throw shade at the paranormal?
I don't know that that's true. I mean, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not out there like conducting lots of surveys, but my impulse in my gut and based on what I've seen is that we can't take really diverse religious groups and treat them like they're one thing. So like for example, there's this funny sort of bit of surveying that comes out of people doing polling about religion and paranormal belief in the United States. And one of those things is that um, there are more haunted houses in the South, the American Southeast, than there are in other regions. Maybe you've heard this, right? The
Yes.
haunted South, right? All of the allegedly most haunted cities are in the South. And yet there's all of this polling that reveals that Southerners are also less likely to believe in ghosts, right? So how can both of those things be true?
Right.
The answer is demons.
Right.
The
Obviously.
answer, right? And it's not so obvious if you're not looking up close at how different kinds of religious groups are thinking. When you're
Right.
looking at particular kinds of Protestants, you're more likely to point to, right, like think the concepts of like demon or Satan rather than like your great aunt haunting a building, right? Um, Catholics tend to have different perspectives on the nature of those demons versus evangelicals, right? In North Carolina, etc. When I was talking about my research with some of my Muslim colleagues at school, well, most of them don't believe in ghosts, right? They would tell me there's stories about jinn and believing
Yeah.
in jinn when they were little, right? And you're not going to go hunting jinn, right?
Right.
Um,
Not in this
so
country. Yeah.
right, and these are all deeply religious groups in very different ways, but they hold sometimes really different beliefs. So, and at the same time, right, like, what do you do with, we were just talking about like witches. Here I'm walking around in this space where I meet witches all the time in paranormal spaces. There's always some workshop about witchcraft when you go to a paranormal con. There's people who identify as witches. Almost none of them say that what they're doing is religion. Right. So, like, as a religious studies scholar, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
Do I take them at their word? Do I treat them the same way I would my subjects who identify as religious? Like, that's one of those words, that we use really differently. So I would just say that it really depends on what group we're talking about. I think that it's ideas about what we would call the paranormal might be something really different in a Muslim space versus a Catholic space versus a Protestant space versus a Wiccan space, for whatever, right? We have a tendency to treat religion like it's one thing, and most of the time it isn't when we look up close.
Do you differentiate between religion and spirituality in your research?
Only insofar as my subjects do. I will tell you, and this isn't a hot take in religious studies, right? But in the same way that I potentially, as a researcher, know something about you demographically based on where you're living, right? Like what you might think about haunted houses if you're a Southerner versus a Midwesterner. I could make some educated guesses based on studies that are out there, right? I wouldn't be correct all the time, but I could make some reasonable kind of guesses. In the same way that that's true, I could make some guesses about you if you prefer the word spiritual to the word religious. Because when we look at a lot of the studies that have been done around communities that identify as spiritual or spiritual but not religious, we see a lot of patterns, right? We see high levels of education. We see whiteness. We see people who were brought up in more conservative religious spaces who then maybe moved out of them. Right. Like, so we see patterns. And that doesn't mean that, like, we individually aren't snowflakes with our own lives, making our own choices. But as a researcher, I'm trained to see patterns. So to me, in my own life, I don't differentiate between those two words, just because I've spent so much time staring at them and I've decided that they're essentially the same thing for me. But if I'm doing an interview with somebody and they tell me that they're spiritual but not religious, I want to know what that means to them. I want to know, did you grow up a particular way? Did something happen? What do you do now that feels more like spirituality, right? And most people will tell you, oh, spirituality is more individual. It's less about rules. It's about personal feeling. It's about intuition, not dogma, right? It takes place outside, not inside, you know? And again, not to like paint people with a broad brush, but when you spend a lot of time looking at things really intently, you see those patterns and they become completely impossible to ignore.
Right.
For sure. So let me ask you, how do you feel that the the paranormal and religion kind of overlap or intertwine? I know there's some real obvious ways, but I know you also have a little bit more experience than I do on this subject, so I'm curious your point of view.
I don't know really. I mean, like, that's kind of the whole point of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I will say that as an outsider walking in, looking at things, and I've been around for about a year now, but that's not long in the grand scheme of things. You both know that.
Yeah.
I can tell you that there are some patterns that I see that I have a lot of questions about. But the other thing that my scholarly training does, hopefully, is it keeps me from being too sure of the conclusions that I draw. And personally, as an ethnographer, it's not, I mean, ethnography as an anthropological method, right? Participant observation is another phrase that folks might have heard if you haven't heard ethnography. Ethnography has this long history of white people coming in and telling brown and impoverished and otherwise marginalized people what's really going on, right? That's built into the history. And anthropologists have done a lot of work to try to dismantle that insofar as that's possible, but that element I think is always going to be there. There's something that feels very imperialistic about ethnography. And I'm conscious of that. To me, and this is why I wanted to be an ethnographer and rely on ethnography as a scholar. I think that people should be allowed to tell their own stories. And my goal is to put those out in a way that is both pleasing to the people telling them and also allows people to speak for themselves. Because just because I'm sitting there, watching an investigation going, jeepers, sure sounds like religion, right? That doesn't, right? Like,
Jeepers.
that doesn't mean that that's how I'm going to frame it in my writing. And it doesn't mean that I'm not checking myself later after I've had that impulse, you know? So like some of the things that I see, to me, who really doesn't have much of a religious background. I mentioned earlier that my family was military. We moved around a little bit. I grew up in the DC area. I wasn't raised with a particular religion. My parents were both members of different religious communities, but had long since lapsed. And that just wasn't a part of my childhood experience. So I wasn't walking around with conceptions of an afterlife. So to me, I'm already thinking there's something different going on if you think that when you die, a spirit is left over, right? That to me feels like an inherently kind of other belief,
Yes.
right? But that's not something that I thought, right? Like that was kind of a different concept for me. I mean, obviously it's built into our culture. So in that sense, it's in the water I'm drinking as a child, but it wasn't at the fore of who I was when I was developing into adulthood. But at the same time, like as a researcher, I can go in and I can see, oh, well, maybe that's my initial impulse, but look at all of these historians and scientists and psychologists, et cetera, who haven't come from specific religious communities, who are drawing some of these same conclusions. Like that's worth taking a second look at.
I think it's interesting too, like you talk about being aware of your biases and going into, these research situations and being able to say, this is a bias I have or I may have in this situation, and kind of checking yourself. And I think that that's something that paranormal investigators often are telling themselves when they go into a place, let me check my preconceived notions, my biases, and whatever. But at the same time, and I'm playing devil's advocate here a bit, the fact that you even think that there might be something there in the first place is kind of, very I don't even want to call it like blinders, because a lot of people are not open to that concept. But the fact that you have that concept that there is something after you pass on, or there's a spirit of whatever kind, whether it's just residual energy and it's not a spirit or whatever it may be, you have this idea of what you think it is before you even go there. And I think that that is an interesting like parallel between the two.
Oh, totally. And I feel like that's related to the kind of flippant comment I made at the beginning about how, like, people use the word skeptic really differently, right? Like, people who are skeptical of climate change don't get degrees, right, in climate science. You know
Right.
what I mean? People who are skeptical of things, like, don't necessarily hang out in those spaces. People who are skeptical, like, generally they don't think about them. It's not part of, right? Like, I'm skeptical of assorted religious communities. I'm not hanging out in their churches, you know? I'm not thinking about them at all. They're not part of my worldview. And yet, many, many people who at least I'm interviewing and interacting with casually in paranormal communities identify as skeptics. And it's because, as far as I can tell, It's complicated, right? But one of those reasons is that we want to move in those spaces feeling like we're reasonable people who are aware of our biases, who are going to ask good questions, who are willing to be wrong. That's what we mean, right? When
Yeah.
look, I just weed us and paranormal spaces.
One
Um,
of us. One of
right.
us.
But like we skepticism is that stage where you at least work to recognize your own bias and then dismantle it where it's appropriate.
Mm.
Um, so in that sense, I would hope that most of the people on your team would be skeptical, at least. If every noise is a haunting and not just a rickety old house that nobody's taking care of, then what are we doing?
It's all demons, Thorn. It's
It's
all
all
demons.
demons.
And they're all at your house.
And nobody needs therapy. It's fine. It's demons.
Yes.
Don't be silly.
So you mentioned like that you grew up without a religious background at home and that you were a child of the 90s. And then also like a big fan of the X-Files. So then how did the pop culture portrayals of witchcraft and the way that religion and influence sort of intersected in that practice influence you?
Oh, yeah. We have to talk about the craft, right?
I was
Um,
thinking like Buffy and like, Willow, but
so
you
actually,
go with the
got
craft.
in- I got into Buffy late.
Mhm.
Actually, I'll tell you the tale. I was a Buffy convert, okay. But my first exposure to like pop culture witchcraft was The Craft, 1996. And it was also really my first experience of what I thought religion looked like, right?
Okay.
And I want you to remember this gorgeous scene before female friendship disintegrates because it's inherently toxic, right? The movie
Right.
kind of goes wrong at that
We
point,
can't support each other. We
right?
all have to be the prettiest woman in the room.
But there's this gorgeous scene where like they're on a bus and they go to this beautiful green field and they've got a picnic, kind of like spooky picnic set up, right? And they're like wishing the best for each other and they're invoking some deity who like I wasn't even sure if I was hearing the name right. I was like, what is this? Um, and I thought to myself, I want whatever the hell that is.
Mhm.
Um,
Including the strong female friendship.
Well, totally. And part of it was also being like an only child, I think,
Yes.
and like, an
Yeah,
army
there was
brat.
totally a sisterhood.
Totally. I wanted that. And so my initial foray into witchcraft was like, I need books. I need one of those ethereal kind of wise shopkeeper ladies to tell me what's what. I
Mhm.
need some magical girlfriends. Like I was ready to go. And I eschewed Buffy the Vampire Slayer when it came out the following year because I didn't think Buffy the Vampire Slayer was serious enough. Buffy the Vampire Slayer portrayed witches essentially as like weapons or enemies, or like it wasn't deeply, profoundly religious.
Okay.
And I remember like this weird kind of like self-righteous lecture because my mother liked Buffy the Vampire Slayer and watched Charmed, and I was like, ugh, I can't believe you watch that garbage. Right. But then I started watching it with friends in college, and I was like, oh my God, these are the best shows ever. Yeah, it was a journey. Yeah, The Craft taught me how to do religion. Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
everybody.
No,
I'm still
sorry.
working on my stiff as a board, light as a feather technique, so.
Oh, it totally works. You just need more people. It's physics. By which I mean magic, right? It's weight
I
dispersal.
mean, physics is magic, right?
It's
At least historically.
sure.
I don't disagree with that. Have you guys seen the video of the oh, there's not a nice word for this. The country gentleman who
My people.
talks about how Buffy the Vampire Slayer saved his life.
I have not.
No.
I will send it to you. His son goes up to him in like I think it's a TikTok or whatever, but he's got his phone and he goes up to his dad and he's like, "Hey, why don't you tell the people about how Buffy the Vampire Slayer saved our life?"
Got the accent going and everything.
It's amazing. It is so good. And I'm not even going to spoil the story for you, but I was like cry laughing by the end of it. And so apparently Sarah Michelle Gellar got wind of it and she loves this video. And the dad has since passed away, and the
Uh-huh.
son heard that there was going to be this like reboot of Buffy and that Sarah Michelle Gellar was involved. And so he's like, let's make this viral again so my dad can have his moment on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I'm like, hell yeah, dude. I'll do whatever. Look, maybe I won't cut it because let's get him
You're
his
helping.
moment. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Oh,
I
totally.
Um,
can link it in the show notes.
I know we've got to. I would love to see that for him. Um,
See,
oh,
Buffy changes lives.
Buffy does change lives,
True.
and so does the craft.
Yeah.
That was a big moment for me because I was not allowed anything spooky or creepy. Like my mom thought ET was too scary when I was growing up, so I wasn't even allowed to watch that.
E.T. was horrifying in her
You know
defense.
what? I've seen it like for the first time in the past couple years and I kind of get it, but like I probably would have been fine. Couldn't watch The Goonies. It's one of my favorite movies now. Like
Mhm.
she just was very concerned that I would be scared and never be able to sleep for the rest of my life, I guess. I don't know, but I The Craft was like the first scary movie that I ever watched,
Mhm.
and I fell in love with it for this, a lot of the same reasons that you were saying. You know, you find that bond between these other people, and they had this moment between the gals in The Craft, and you want that, for yourself. But also I wanted the magic and I wanted those sick outfits, like I wanted all
Oh,
of it.
mm,
I
oh yeah.
just wanted to be half as cool as they were, and I was not.
I know it's the craft and practical magic, and then you're devastated as an adult to realize that half of them were wearing wigs.
Yeah.
Not even the hair was real,
None of it.
right?
Well,
None
we are the
except for
weirdos now,
Feruza
so it's
Balk's makeup, I think. That was pretty legit. I feel like that
So,
was
yeah.
her as a human. All right, so let me ask you, we touched a little bit on witchcraft, but can you give us kind of like as a religion or a practice, like what is like a quick high level 101 explanation or definition is probably a better word. And could you, maybe this is a better question, could you explain if there's a difference between witchcraft and Wicca?
Oh, that I can do. I thought you were it's like every religious studies scholar's nightmare is to be asked, what even is religion? Right. And we all have our
And I'm
pet
taking notes.
definitions. Right. What I say is absolutely right,
Yep.
everybody. You know, right, we all have our pet definitions and they kind of shift. I've got some favorite definitions, right?
Sure.
I'll for general viewers, I'll just say that it moves. Often what we decide is religion versus what isn't religion depends on in groups and out groups,
Mm.
right? Um, Historically, if we're talking about like white imperialism, religion is what white educated people do, and everybody else had something else. They had magic, or they had animism, or they had primitive something, something, whatever. Religion became this thing that white Europeans in particular did, and everybody else could just go screw themselves, right? Today, I would say that we should at the very least be aware that when we are deciding that something is a religion versus is not a religion, we are participating in that history. Whether we mean to or not, we are making a decisive statement about people who do or don't do the thing. And often those words are weaponized against marginalized people still. So, for example, if you look at what groups get called cults versus religions, they tend to disproportionately be made up of marginalized people, right? And that's not an accident.
Right.
So I always say, like, you know, like just put a pin in that and think about from moment to moment. I'd like to think of religion at the very least as a political category. It's a category that tells the government how it should regulate you or not. So on the one hand, and this is where it's kind of cool in like witchcraft spaces, for a lot of the people who are identifying as, oh, well, witchcraft is a practice, right? It's not a religion. A lot of them are very consciously eschewing that kind of governmental oversight, right? It's like, no, this is rhizomatic, this is underground, this is not for the public eye, this is private, this is individual, in the sense that like religion is out in the public eye and can be regulated. Witchcraft can't, right? So people approach things really differently. I will say, to get to the second half of your question, it's probably more complicated than most people want to say. Like the pat internet definition is witchcraft is a practice and Wicca is a religion. But
Right.
hopefully I've dismantled that in the last 2 minutes of me talking.
Totally.
I will say that if you think of witchcraft collectively as kind of like one big box, Wicca is a dot in that box. It's a type of witchcraft, of which there are many, many, many. I wouldn't say that it hinges one way or the other necessarily on whether or not we think something is religious. There are lots of people who see their witchcraft as religious, right? The rise of what people are now calling folk witchcraft, especially folk witchcraft that's inspired by various Catholic traditions, Catholic traditions. Right, like these are existing very firmly within like religious spaces. Me as an outsider, who am I to say whether or not that is or isn't religion? That needs to be up to the people doing it. But Wiccans know they're Wiccan, right? Like that is a box that you step into as a witch. And it's defined by specific, I would say specific ritual practices rather than specific beliefs. Most Wiccans will tell you that you'll hear people say things like, oh, it's orthopraxic, not orthodoxic. We can complicate those words in the same way that we can complicate religion, because I would argue that belief and practice are always intertwined. You're never just doing one. But you can recognize Wicca because it very clearly has this lineage with Western ceremonial magic. So you see, the knife, the cup, the pentacle, the wand, those 4 familiar tools from the tarot, right?
Yep.
You see all that, like Gerald Gardner and the folks that he was working with in crafting these traditions were all heavily influenced by a number of early Western esoteric movements. And you see all of that. Casting a circle, right? Especially a quartered circle, the invocation of 4 elements, the conception of the divine as a kind of like dual, often gendered goddess and god kind of force, right? Those things are characteristic of Wicca. And when I see those things in somebody else's practice, at the very least, I know they're either influenced by Wicca or they're influenced by Wicca's ancestors, which more and more I think is the likely thing, right? We're all reading Crowley, right? And we're all looking at Solomon, right? Like we're all looking at all of these things that are coming out of Western magical traditions, even if we're not always aware of it, right? In the same way that paranormal communities are really heavily influenced by Swedenborgianism and spiritualism, even if you yourself don't identify as a spiritualist, right? You see that stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, but if somebody tells you that they're Wiccan, that means that they've consciously stepped into this particular paradigm of witchcraft. Yeah, so
The dot within the box.
the dot within the box, right? I say it kind of crudely in one of my books that, right, like football is a sport, but not all sports are football. If I tell you that I play football, you understand that I don't necessarily play all sports. And if you meet somebody who plays baseball, that doesn't mean that they're going to play football, but you understand sports. Okay.
Right.
And then we can have a fight, right? Is chess a sport? Is
Golf
poker a sport? Is ballet a sport? Right? So it gets messy immediately.
I love messy.
Life is more fun that way, I think. I'm suspicious of people who want clear-cut boundaries.
Yeah. I want to know all the things, and I want to live in the mess for a little bit. Like I want to live on the outskirts of the mess where I can just step back and observe the mess and sometimes maybe dip a toe in if I want
Sure.
to.
I want to be in the mess, like experiencing it, making it worse.
Cheers to you. I love that.
Think about ethnography.
Yeah.
So how do you, now that you've, explained a little bit more about how Wicca is a subsidiary of witchcraft, like how do you see the paranormal intersecting with witchcraft?
Yeah, all of these questions are big, and the answer is always it's complicated.
Perfect.
Again, we like the mess.
Yeah, I will say that for me, they're not immediately linked, but I'm curious about how they could be linked. I've had conversations with people on my team and people on other teams about like, hey, do you want to like try magic conscious? Like, do you want to stop pretending to be scientists for a second and actually do some ritual magic? Like what would happen, right? Like let's just see everybody. And I'm game for that. But that I wouldn't say is a typical kind of paranormal experience based on what I've seen, like going to like ticketed investigations or cons or that sort of thing. Like generally speaking, there isn't somebody there waving a wand. Maybe dowsing rods in very particular circumstances. But
I
like
hope I'm not
my,
reading.
yeah, but like my my coven meetings and my own individual kind of rituals, I'm not thinking about paranormal stuff at all, right? I'm not trying to talk to dead people in my house, etc. My own practice of witchcraft is very theistic. It's about worship. It's, that's one of the things that makes my practice distinct from other types of witches. And I think a lot of Wiccans would say that. But when you go to events and you talk to people on teams and you meet people more broadly, you realize that lots and lots of people bring various kinds of witchcraft into their investigations. They just might mean different things, right? So like for some people that might mean using a dark mirror to scry instead of only using electronic devices. Maybe you've got kind of both things going on at the same time. I would argue and again, I've only been here a year, but I've seen this a few times. I would argue that the Estes method is a form of divination. Like, I don't see how it's not.
I mean,
Right?
anybody who tells you it's not is lying to you.
Like,
Or to
you,
themselves, yeah.
you cannot tell me that deciphering messages in white noise where there shouldn't be messages at all is not divination. So what if I approach it conscious. Like I'm a researcher, I'm an ethnographer, I'm not there as a believer, I'm not even really a paranormal investigator, right? Like I'm there to take notes on other people. So in that sense, I'm going to do whatever they tell me and I'm going to believe whatever they tell me, it is what it is. But as a ritual magician, as a witch, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I could get something out of this if I approached it with these ritual techniques that I've, been inundated in for years. So I feel like I'm walking into these spaces with two brains, ethnographer brain and magician brain. And sometimes they overlap, and often where they overlap, it's actually really like disconcerting and makes me question who I am and what I'm doing. Right. And then I have to go back to like my academic mentors and be like, is it okay that I'm a wizard? Like, what if what if it's magic, right? And they're just like, interesting.
Elaborate on that.
Yeah, more. Yeah, so like with anything, the strategy for me is to always ask people like what they mean. So when somebody who says that they're a witch comes into an investigation, I'll go like, okay, what does that mean to you? What are you going to use? What are you doing? Rather than walking in with preconceived judgments about what I think my own witchcraft would do with the thing,
Right, because you don't even know if they practice the same witchcraft that
And
you
they
do.
probably don't. They probably don't. And that's cool, ultimately. It's like tools in the toolkit, right? You've got more. I don't want a bunch of Wiccans in a room with me, really, on any given moment.
Should I do? But I would be real obnoxious and I'd be asking about 1,000 questions. What does that mean? What does that mean? Tell me more about that. Actually, I did want to ask because, and this kind of leads into that a little bit, but um, it seems like in recent years, witchcraft has kind of seen another resurgence. And I'm wondering, A, why you think that is, and B, do you feel that new witches are welcomed into the community, or does the community tend to like close off to newcomers? I know,
Um,
loaded questions here.
I know. Well, let me start with the second question first. I think that's a little bit easier.
Sure.
I wish that we were more welcoming. It really depends, I think, on where you are and who you are, what sort of witchcraft you're asking about. But I think that collectively, and I see this in like Discord communities, I saw this on TikTok when I was on TikTok, like by and large, I think we're not particularly kind to newcomers. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is I think because witchcraft is not this regulated hierarchical thing where it's clear who's in charge, a lot of people are vying for airspace. Everybody's competing to have the biggest channel, right? Or to have the most far-reaching podcast, or I'm going to write a book, or right, like I'm going to be a teacher, right? Like we have to kind of elbow our way into some sort of social capital because there's no formal way of getting it. And one of the ways to do that is by corralling newcomers and pretending to either be educating them or putting them in their place. That's something that I see a lot of. Um, and often it's other relative newcomers. Kind of like how, look, I've been going to paranormal conventions and going on investigations for a year, but you both know that I'm a newcomer. A year is nothing. In witchcraft, not only is a year nothing, 5 years is nothing. 10 years is barely anything. It's like anything else, right? Like you never have as much experience as you could. So often the people doing the most bullying are people who've been around for only a couple of years. You know, I'm not saying that's universal, right? But I think that's one thing that happens. And that bums me out. The other thing I think, as far as like hostility towards newcomers, is most newcomers, I think that this is observationally true. It's not like people are doing pew polls on like witch talk or whatever. But most newcomers to witchcraft are women and girls. They're queer, they're non-binary, they're marginalized in other ways, right? And we're mean to those people anyway. I think that's some of it. In the 90s, y'all might remember this, right? Wicca was a thing that stupid teenage girls did. If you told a grown-up in 1998 or whatever that you were interested in Wicca, it was like, of course,
Yeah.
she's a dumb teenage girl or whatever.
That, and you probably do drugs and you probably have other destructive habits. Like,
Right, like there's something wrong with you.
right.
And now, like generally speaking, like Wicca is on the outs. Like there aren't people aren't like beating down the doors to be Wiccans, right? But we are suspicious of people who are interested in witchcraft collectively, and a lot of those people are from other sorts of marginalized communities. And like I said, we're mean to them anyway. So I see, I mean, I guess I'll call it bullying. I don't know. I see suspicion or hostility coming from, for example, comparatively educated, older, white, male presenting ceremonial magicians, right? Versus like the teen girl who just thinks she's a witch and got her first spell book, right? If you get on Reddit, there's plenty of, Western esotericists there to tell you that like witchcraft is stupid. Like that's still a thing. Um, but that's true in like gaming communities and like I'm a guitarist, right? It's true in metal communities and other kinds of music communities, right? Like, if you don't like the same bands, if you haven't mastered this solo, are you even a guitar player, right? Like it's really not special as far as like witches go. So I think you have to be intrepid, like as a newcomer. Presumably, if you're interested in witchcraft, you've already had some experience with being made fun of somewhere else in your life, right? And I think just having the willingness to push past that and do it anyway. If you're overly concerned with what other people think about you, you're probably not going to be a very good witch or magician anyway. You know, people don't do this because they think it's going to make them normal.
That's a
You
good point.
shouldn't. You're in for a surprise, right? Um, so there's that. As far as a resurgence, I would say that that was true leading up to the pandemic and the pandemic itself. I feel like the bubble has actually burst.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm saying that for based on a few observations. I think people were looking for all kinds of things during the pandemic.
Yeah.
My friend Jason Mankey says that it's about every 20 years. About every 20 years, there's a witchcraft resurgence for one reason or another.
Seems about right.
So and we could make all kinds of educated guesses about why something like, a global pandemic might drive people to be interested in magic when they were trapped in their houses. But the bubble feels like it's burst to me. And I say that because I don't see books selling the way they used to. I don't see viral kind of witchcraft YouTube and TikTok content the way I used to. A lot of the people who were really big kind of influencer type personalities during the pandemic have moved on to other things. Um,
Kind of things have they moved on to?
a lot of them have moved on to other kinds of magical traditions and explicitly aren't identifying as witches, or they're identifying as other thing, right? Like, um, people are increasingly invested, I think, in ancestral traditions, and those aren't necessarily witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
So they're pursuing things like folk traditions, right? They're pursuing grandma's version of Catholicism or whatever. And I think that's fine. Like, I think that's great even. And it's also very normal. I think if you're doing any kind of sincere spiritual seeking, right, magical practice, etc., you necessarily end up in different spaces. The Wicca that I practice in my 40s is not the Wicca I was practicing in 1998.
I hope not.
Thank God.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I don't know. I think we'll see more in the next few years as far as what's to come. But it's really interesting either way, and I'm pumped that it's as easy as I think it's ever been to become interested in witchcraft, although maybe more confusing. There's definitely more resources, I think, to wade through, and a lot more garbage,
There's
but
just so
a
much
lot more
out
great
there.
stuff too. Yeah, there's so
For
much.
sure.
So you sort of touched on a lot of things, but is there anything, like aside from what you've already said, that if you had like one piece of advice for a baby witch, like if you were coming up now, like what would you tell yourself? Aside from the like embrace your weirdness, it's totally worth it.
I would say be kind to other people and listen. It's natural and normal. I don't want to stereotype young people. I'm speaking as much to my younger self. And also, like, I'm a classroom teacher, so like I'm speaking to my students too. Um, it's very easy to feel like you know everything when you're 20 years old. And there are a lot of very worldly 20-year-olds out there, and definitely some people know more than others, but your brain is not even done growing at that point. So even no matter how experienced you are, there's a lot of room there. I wish that I had done more listening as a young person. I came in ready to make myself an expert and then assert my expertise. I imagine that's something you see in paranormal spaces too. And what I see is newcomers, not necessarily young people, newcomers who are wrestling with a very particular kind of insecurity that comes with being a beginner. That's very natural. It's natural to feel insecure as a beginner. And they're looking for validation. They're looking to feel like they're doing it right. They're looking to feel like, they're not offending anybody, right? I don't want to do anything wrong. And I would just say, like, insofar as it is possible, chill the hell out, watch people, listen to a lot of perspectives. Don't not read something because it was written by somebody who practices a different kind of witchcraft, right?
Okay.
Don't take something as the last word just because they're your favorite influencer, right? They're the best TikToker, etc., or whatever. Like, um listen to a lot of different voices and pay attention if your reading list is all white people, right? Or all men. You'd be shocked how many witchcraft reading lists are all men. It's actually kind of startling. Um, Pay attention,
Yeah.
right? Do you have black and brown practitioners on your feed? Are you diversifying what you are consuming in such a way? Are you reading things that disagree with each other? I think that people are so consumed. I see it as a different kind of purity culture that's kind of developed amongst young people, and I see it in my classrooms at the university too. Students are so terrified of doing wrong things, right? Everybody wants to be unproblematic. Everybody wants to be doing the right thing, and that's admirable, but it's also impossible. And when the alternative is not doing anything at all, I think that's a mistake. And I think the best way to find your own path is by reading and learning and listening as much as you can, filling your life with people who are different, right? And then letting yourself experiment and be willing to be wrong and know that it's not the end of the world when you are.
I love it. Those are all just great pieces of advice for life in general, honestly. And you're exactly right. They're all things I wish I had learned when I was younger.
Oh, and just do whatever the ritual is. Just do it, right? People are always like, oh, I have to read everything first. No, you don't. We all impulsively set something on fire because we were trying to make a boy like us, or like everybody has that like spell in their history where they're like, that was not good, right? But
Melanie, what's your story? I just saw that eye roll. Like,
it's better than being an armchair witch who doesn't do anything for years because you're scared. Just do the thing, right? Jump into the pool. Just jump into the pool. It's going to be okay. I promise that you are not so powerful right at the beginning that you're going to maim anybody. Just do
You're
it.
not Harry Potter, man.
Right?
drowning is fun. Just go for it. You'll learn to swim.
Fine.
Yeah, you can swim.
All right. So, Thorn, I just want to say thank you so much for chatting with us today. We are coming up on our time. It is always a pleasure to talk to you, but I also want to ask you before you go, do you, Thorn Mooney, want to become a member of the secret society of the Spooky Sisterhood?
I mean, yes, obviously. Are you going to come investigate with me since we're basically neighbors? I'll do tradesies.
Please take her. She's never gone.
I know. We can fix I am a scholar, an outside skeptic, and I've been on more investigations than you have.
I know.
Come show me up.
I think I'd like to blame it on my childhood.
Jump in the pool.
Do we have a moment to talk about trauma? I'm ready.
Stop being an armchair investigator.
You've got the excuse. Come, I'll do you if you do me.
Perfect. I can't wait. We'll do each other. Okay, are you ready? You can raise your hand if you like. Alex, I think, used her middle finger, whatever. Whatever feels right. Repeat after me, please. I, Thorn, promise to show compassion to the spirits, my community, and myself. Remain open-minded and non-judgmental. Use critical thinking. Treat people, places, and things with respect. And above all, keep it spooky.
I wish I had my pop figure of Dana Scully. I feel like I should be holding her.
Oh, you know what? We can do that later, and we can have like a second, like a reaffirmation ceremony.
I love it. You got to find something spooky in your house to swear to. Dana Scully is perfect.
I love it. Oh, what you got?
I was gonna say I have this creepy thrift store lamp.
Yes, that. Yes.
Lights up.
Yes, that.
Look, it looks like her throat has been cut.
It really does. That is terrifying. It will haunt my dreams.
Why is she pointing?
What is she pointing at? Is she pointing at the
going,
thing that cut her throat?
Is she
like,
doing
now,
double horns?
no,
No.
no.
Oh.
She's like holding a cup and she's going, no.
Red rum.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Well, Thorn, can you tell everyone where they can find you, what you've got coming up besides a nice, hopefully, summer hiatus?
You can find me. I've taken a step back from social media because it's not good for me. It's probably not good for you either. But I'm not the boss of you. So I've stepped back from a lot of things, but I'm on Blue Sky. So if you're curious about Blue Sky, imagine Twitter before it was bad. And we'll see. I feel like it could kind of go either way, but right now it's good. So you can find me on Blue Sky at Thorn the Witch. And then I also have a very neglected website at thornthewitch.com. So I wrote books. You could read them. If you Google Thorn Mooney, all kinds of horrifying things from 1998 may or may not come up depending on how good you are at Google.
I can't wait to troll you. I have a degree in Googling.
Amazing.
That's so exciting.
It is.
All
I'm
right.
gonna put my
Well, before
librarian
we
skills to
sign
work.
off, sorry, say again.
I'm gonna put my librarian skills to work.
Heck yeah. I might not even make you hunt.
I'm
Oh my
just gonna
gosh.
send you random screenshots on Discord of things that I find.
Mhm.
Wait, make sure you tag everybody though, because I want to see them too.
I've had very different hair over the years.
So, before we sign off, just a reminder to our listeners to please check out our social media. You can visit beacons.ai/spooky sisterhood, and there you'll find links to our socials, our website, our videos, our guests info, and so much more. A big thank you to our Patreon pals. If you'd like to join us for some after the gavel conversation with our special guests and you want to have the opportunity to ask them questions, then you still have time to go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spooky sisterhood, and check us out. With that, if there's no more official business, this meeting of the Secret Society of the Spooky Sisterhood is now adjourned. As always, keep it spooky, Sibs.